Hi, and welcome to Writer's Ramble. I'm Deanna.
I, I'm Aragorn, son of I'm Michael. Uh,
Which, well, that obviously leads into what we're going to talk about, which is Lord of the Rings, but not quite yet. First, little disclaimer here. It's been a while since we've uploaded anything. It's been ages.
to all 25 potential people who are subscribed who are gonna hear this, we are sorry that it took so long. It's been kind of busy. To the rest of you, you can kind of just ignore this section.
Yeah, so to our 25 fans, we love you. Thank you. We're sorry if you thought we were dead, but no. We had interesting things going on in our lives, so I would say the last 365 days have been chaotic for
I mean, it's been chaotic for more than 365 days. It was just that doing the podcast and trying to do all the other stuff got to be too much at a certain point.
Well, what I was leading up to here is that we got married. Yay!
Yay!
But it was more than that. Just a lot of things have happened within the last 365 days. Like, I would just say year, but we're like halfway through this year. Anyways, I'm kind of being pedantic here. The point is, like, I got my bachelor's in psychology. We had like a random, unexpected trip to New York. We continued planning the wedding. We eventually got married. We also like moved and like had to like change jobs and move to a city, and also went on our honeymoon. And that's just like some of those happened within the span of like 3 months, and it was like wild. And that doesn't even account for like different like our personal like writing projects, which is kind of a video in itself, but we're not talking about those today. We're gonna talk about Lord of the Rings. So both of our experiences with Lord of the Rings are kind of opposites, so I will let you lead first, Michael.
So, I am not the largest Lord of the Rings fan in the world. So, major dweebs, forgive me for any sort of things that I get wrong, any things where you might feel the need to go, actually, yeah, I've watched the movies mainly, so if you have a common complaint about how people are like, oh, well, in the books it was different than the movies. Yeah, well, like, I have read the books, but retained practically none of it. I read them over a weekend, and everyone's like, wow, that's so amazing. Yeah, well, I can't remember what I read because of that.
You said you were a kid, weren't you?
Hey, 15, 16.
Oh, okay. I could see it would be hard to retain everything if you like powered through in like a weekend. Like that's insane.
I mean, that's a benefit to the books. That means that they were very engaging.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I used to read a lot more, and I'm realizing as I'm getting older that I don't remember hardly anything that I read because I read too quickly and I didn't really pay close enough attention. My history with Lord of the Rings is that I grew up watching the movies. My dad is a bigger nerd than I am about them, and he would constantly make us watch them. So, I have seen the originals, I've seen the extended, I've mostly seen the originals, and those were the ones that we watched when I forced Deanna to watch them recently. But I am fairly knowledgeable about it, and I really appreciate it. Some have said that the Lord of the Rings movie adaptations are some of the best adaptations ever made. I'm inclined to agree, even though I know, you can't ever get 100% accurate between the two. And yeah, I just see a lot of value in those movies overall for what they did for cinema and just overall being a very interesting, emotional, complex, and beautiful set of films. despite the fact that it's mostly just walking and battles.
Which, I know that they were filmed a while ago, but I will say that I think it holds up even to, like, today's, effects and stuff that you see in movies. Like, it was, like, good to look at.
Yeah, it's surprisingly held up very well considering they were made around the turn of the century when CGI famously did not look all that great. I guess that just goes to show that time and like advancement of technology doesn't necessarily mean you're getting better CGI. It really just has to do with how much time and money the artists are given to realize their art. Although there still were some moments where you could tell that it's a little older.
When you say turn of the century, like, my brain is still hung up on, like, this was made in 1900.
I am not wrong for saying turn of the century. No, talking about the 2000s, I just think that some people would find that weird.
Gonna offend a lot of people. Be like, what the fuck? It's like, well, we are, like, 23 years past turn of the century, technically.
We are encroaching upon a quarter into this century, and I think that some people are having a very hard time with that concept.
Time moves forward, we all die one day. Anyways.
Life is meaningless, we're all going to die. Anyway.
So, my experience with Lord of the Rings was quite different. I didn't watch any of the movies until high school. I had a class, and it was kind of a garbage class, if I'm being honest. It was called Film Studies, which, like, sounds great on paper. It sounds like a great class to take in high school when you don't want to do anything and you just want to watch movies, and that is exactly what it was. Like,
they did not, in fact, study films. They watched films.
Yeah, we watched films. I think I was the only kid in the entire class that was disappointed because I was like, well, I want to fucking talk about these. I want to talk about these films. But no, we didn't even talk about them. I had a teacher, I get the impression that, like, the school just, like, needed another class for whatever reason, and they just kind of assigned this to him, and we're like, hey, you're gonna teach this. And he's like, cool, I'm not gonna teach anything. I'm just gonna watch films. And so at one point, someone asked if we could watch Lord of the Rings, and I believe they picked the extended versions, and mind you, we watched all three back to back, and you can only watch an hour's worth at a time, for each day at school, so I think it was...
So you're doing this for, like, 3 weeks straight?
Oh gosh, at least a month. It was just Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure was great for a lot of kids, but for me, and, like, the genres that I enjoy, I'm more of a romance type person. I do like, like, action as well, and by action I mean, like, Marvel. I guess I'm kind of a basic bitch in that case, but...
This isn't a new or original observation, but the actual romance in Lord of the Rings is kind of not great. It's very in the background. Arwen shows up in like 5-6 scenes most, and feels like a weird outlier. And the thing between Eowyn and Aragorn never came to anything, and she ended up with Faramir at the end. Those who have read the books would know that more than those who have watched the movies, because there's exactly one scene in which you see the two of them standing side by side during Aragorn's coronation, so it's not like you really even understand what's happening if you've watched the movies, but if you read the books, you know. However, just not very big deal in the movies, and ironically, the other characters, like Sam and Frodo, seem like they have way better chemistry. It's just that they weren't gay.
Oh, yeah. So, like, mind you, me being more of a romance reader and watcher, I was trying to just grasp onto any romance that I possibly could, and one of our good buddies, Josh, he was sitting next to me while we were watching these, and I just tormented him the whole time by any time Sam and Frodo were on screen, I was just like, now kiss. And that was just how I coped during all those many hours that we watched Lord of the Rings. And as for the more, like, actual genuine, like, romantic subplots, that was, like, probably the most interested I was at the time, because Lord of the Rings is more of a high fantasy type, genre, and that is, like, just not my personal cup of tea. It might be one of my most disliked genres. It's not as bad nowadays as it was then, but it was tough for me to sit through it. Like, the most fantasy-esque, like, related stories that I've enjoyed was more like Legend of Zelda, which I feel like is much more, like, kind of tame in comparison. And maybe it's because you're on your own, like, little adventure and controlling Link and stuff.
Well, it's certainly smaller generally in scope than something like Lord of the Rings. I'll admit. So she doesn't like high fantasy. Please leave an angry comment down below. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I'm more of a Jane Austen kind of girl, okay? And it was really hard for me to watch. Okay, like, I think of moments when I was watching Lord of the Rings the first time around where I was like most. I need a good word for this. I'm trying to think of a good descriptor of just being so flabbergasted, but in a negative way.
Bamboozled.
Bamboozled.
It's not a great word for it, but just exhausted and.
So, viewers, let us know a good descriptor for this.
We're writers.
Yeah, we're writers, but, you know.
Listen, I have a decent vocabulary. It just takes me a while to flip through the files. Halfway through this podcast, I'm gonna think of a good word for it.
Anyways, I'll just use bamboozled for lack of a better word in this case. But I think the most bamboozled I was watching all of Lord of the Rings was when Gandalf was, like, falling into, like, that, like, fiery pit-looking thing, I think it was. After, who was it again?
It was the Balrog from the Mines of Moria. It was the big fire shadow demon with the whip and the big fiery wings, and it looked epic as shit.
Meanwhile, I was like, what the fuck? Anyways, and then once I started dating you, Michael, and I found out that Lord of the Rings was one of your more favorite stories, I was like, oh, really? It's like, oh man, I'm probably gonna have to watch that again one day.
And that day has come!
Which is only fair, you know, we kind of take turns tormenting each other with different movies or shows.
She made me watch Twilight. Yeah. She made me watch Downton Abbey. She made me watch Pride and Prejudice. I get to have Lord of the Rings, thank you.
And, you know, surprisingly, rewatching it with you, and maybe it's because, you know, I was also having some drinks with it, you know, you gotta make it fun. But you know what, I actually did not mind it so much this time around, and I think there were a few things that helped. One being that we had subtitles on, which I've just kind of gotten used to, like, reading what people are saying now, so. And there were probably a lot of names and other things that just went right over my head when I was first watching it because I wasn't, like, fully paying attention, which you can't really do that with Lord of the Rings, I feel like. Yeah, the subtitles on, you were there to kind of, like, pause and explain things to me if I missed something because, okay, like, I don't know what is up with my... like, squirrel brain. But sometimes, like, I'll just see something on screen and I get distracted and I'm like, where have I seen that person? What movie were they in?
And in about 5 seconds of the movie is erased from her memory as she's trying to figure out something else while she's supposed to be watching the movie. She's thinking about something else and it's crowding out all other information that's being thrown at her. I can't tell you how many times we've gone back like 5-10 seconds watching something and being like, okay, pay attention this time.
It also is more difficult if you're a little tipsy, but anyways. So yeah, I had that advantage of you were sitting next to me to explain things. We also kind of had a better pacing, like we broke it up so that it wasn't like a month of watching these.
Yeah, usually it was like half of a movie in one session, so like an hour and a half at a time. Is a lot more doable for your average movie watcher than the bit of a slog that the 3 hours are on their own. I mean, it's perfectly doable, but you know, when we're busy and you know we have other stuff we want to do, I recommend watching them in smaller increments to make it a more enjoyable experience. I've done every version of watching these movies. We've watched one of them in one day and then did the other ones like a different day. I've watched all three of them, the extended ones, in a single day, and I've just kind of watched each individually at different points in time. And I think that everyone's different, to each their own, but it makes it a lot more digestible to keep it within a shorter time frame, like within a month, but little chunks of it at a time.
I also feel like, though, your family is kind of crazy, where, like, you'll watch, like, a whole season of Stranger Things, like, in one day.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really. I've learned how I prefer to go about things now that I'm living on my own and I get to do things my own way. I kind of prefer to, sort of like a nightly thing. One episode, next night another episode, next night another episode. But especially when I was younger and I didn't have a job and I didn't have a whole lot of other things going on in my life, I was more prone to binging. And now the thought of that sounds like too much for me, and I don't know if this is me getting old or what, but it's just how I prefer to go about it now. It's a lot of commitment, to watch all three of them in a day. I mean, who's got time for that?
Death comes for us all, eventually.
Anyway, back to Lord of the Rings. One thing about the series as a whole, which is kind of what made me want to rewatch them this last time, was just the sort of inherent beauty that they have to them. The music can be very beautiful. The scenery at times can be very beautiful. The characters, for the most part, the good characters are very good and very wholesome and very just like when people go outside and they touch grass. that's like the cinematic equivalent to going outside and touching grass. It just feels relieving to see such beautiful sights, to sort of regain a little faith in humanity, watching these characters be all heroic. And yeah, like obviously there's darkness and stuff in Lord of the Rings. It's mostly about war, which is not a beautiful thing, but there's just some quality to it that I've always appreciated for being very idealistic. The good guys are very good, the bad guys are very bad, and there's just a lot of beauty in it, which is just that nice escapism I need at times.
It's funny because it wasn't until I was watching it with you and like partway through like the first one, I kind of stopped and I was like, is this like about World War II?
Yeah, it's so funny seeing the perspective of like non-fans, because again, my dad is a huger nerd than me, and I've also read the books now, but every little bit of trivia about Lord of the Rings that you could know, I probably know from my dad and from also just reading the books. And so she's like, oh, is this about World War II? It's like, oh yeah, you wouldn't have known that, but obviously it is. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote these post World War II, just a little bit after it, and has gone on record as saying that obviously this story is sort of fantasyization of World War II. Not a perfect 1-to-1, but definitely like a metaphor.
It's like, I didn't see Hitler show up with his mustache.
I mean, Hitler's essentially Sauron. It's just not that hard. Just shows how deep I'm in this, where I'm like, oh yeah, you didn't know that.
Alright, you're stupid.
And for those wondering, yes, of course, I know the thing about Aragorn and breaking his toe.
Oh shit, that's what I was gonna say, because like it was like probably a good year ago where like we were talking movie trivia and like you started to like say that and I was like, yeah, I know he broke his toe, and you're like, how'd you know that? It's like, come on, everyone knows that trivia, okay?
Yeah, I guess I walked into that one.
Well, that's quick. Anyways, so like Frodo just doesn't deserve Sam. I'll say that. I felt really bad for Sam watching it. I want to like wrap him up in a blanket and feed him soup, and he didn't deserve none of that shit.
Got some real hot takes there. Nobody appreciates Sam on the internet, no sir.
No, I know. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone apparently prefers Sam, but he's just such a good guy. And I don't blame him one bit for wanting to, like, kill Gollum. Like, I probably would have too. And I'd be like, I see the mountain in the distance, just go that way. We don't fucking need Gollum. Like, fuck that guy.
Alright, time to turn into a big old fucking nerd here. They couldn't have just climbed the mountains. They were too big. That's what they said in the books. Very, very tall, impassable mountains, okay? They couldn't have flown the eagles in there. There's, like, too much smoke and smog and shit. Don't think about the fact that the Eagles did fly into Mordor to rescue Sam and Frodo at the end of the third one. I don't really have an answer for that, but there was reasons. Okay.
But yeah, I would have been right there with Sam. Like, if I were part of that group, I would have been like, yeah, let's kill Gollum.
And then the ring never would have been destroyed, and you would have fucked the whole world.
I have pretty good willpower.
What do you mean?
I feel like you need good willpower for, like, you know, destroying the ring.
You were not paying attention in the movie. They said that man, as a general term for human beings.
Yeah, I'm a girl, sir.
Mankind, they desire power above all else. They're the ones most susceptible to the ring. You are a human. You would not have withstood the ring's power.
Okay, counterpoint. I'm a small person. Like, I might as well be a hobbit.
Counterpoint, that's stupid. Do you wear shoes?
Not when I'm indoors.
What about outdoors?
No.
Okay, you're lying now.
The world is, like, the outside world's pokey.
How hairy are your feet? On a scale from 1 to Hobbit.
Not very hairy.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
just, okay, there's hairless cats, you know? I'm a hairless
Have you
hobbit.
ever grown a vegetable in your life?
I have a succulent. I have two.
Have you grown a vegetable?
I probably did, like, in, like, first grade. You know, everyone has, like, that that school project where you, like, grow, like, a bean or something.
I've never done that.
Really?
No?
Wow.
Hey, comments. Have you ever grown a vegetable? I'm actually kind of curious now if this is, like, a thing. She's not a hobbit. You're not even short enough to be a hobbit. They're, like, well in the mid 4-foot range, if that, and you're 5'2".
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, counterpoint, like, some people, like, on my mom's side of the family, everyone is very short on that side, and I think going back far enough, there were genuine dwarves. Like, I'm not even kidding. There was one, like, great something grandfather. I think he was, like, an inch or two taller than a dwarf, but I mean, come on. Like, he was, yeah. I'll just say that much, so, like, you know, maybe I could be a hobbit. Anyways.
The jury's out. So back to Lord of the Rings. Now that you have rewatched it, are there any sort of big takeaways you have now that you were able to pay attention? What did you like most? What did you dislike most? It's kind of useless to ask me because I made all of my opinions about this concrete long ago. I'm someone that focuses on characters more than anything. So, like, I have different characters that I admired.
Obviously, Aragorn was probably one of the more favorites.
You say obviously, but
Well,
why is that obvious to
he's
you?
like everyone's favorite, I feel like.
Not necessarily. I think some people jive with Pippin more because they're little jokesters. Some people like
Fuck Pippin. That
like
guy.
personally, I think my favorite upon rewatching was Gimli. He's so funny. He's so cool.
No, he is cool.
Yeah.
I do like him. He's funny. Especially him and, is it Legolas?
Legolas, yeah.
Yeah. Lego.
Lego less.
Lassie. Anyways, I liked, their dynamic there, especially because they started off disliking each other, but then they're like real bros at the end. And so, like, I do appreciate that.
Best friends.
I will say that I did enjoy, what little bit of romance there was. I do also appreciate that, I like it when you can have a story where there's friends that can just be good friends, and it doesn't have
Instead
to be...
of drama.
No, they had drama for sure.
Oh, you're talking about Sam and Frodo?
Yeah, no, Sam and Frodo, because, like,
Oh, you mean like they're not in love with each other? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like, it's good to also have, like, it's good to remember that you can have a solid friendship in a story, and it doesn't have to be, like, romantic, I feel like a lot of people push for, like, everything has to be romantic. And, like, sometimes you just need a good bromance,
If you want probably the best example of a non-toxic masculinity friendship where they're just really comfortable, good bros with each other, Sam and Frodo take the cake. They are not lovers. They are very good friends, and they are friends to the end, and that is what I aspire to be with all my bros. And you should too.
But, I don't blame people, though, for having fan fictions of them, because, I mean, did you see just, the way they'd look at each other, and...
He calls him Mr. Frodo.
But as for the actual, like, romantic bits, like, I do remember back in the day when I was watching in high school, like, I felt really bad for... Was her name Eowyn? Is that her name?
Eowyn, yeah.
Yeah, I did feel bad for her, because it's like, oh... I feel like a lot of people have been in her shoes before, and that's always a tough place to be. But, as for, like, Aragorn and... what was her name? Arwen. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I still appreciate their romance, too, especially now that we're older, because, I feel like I kind of related with that as well, because me and you did long distance, the beginning of our relationship, so I was like, oh, I feel that, I feel all of that. Not that I was going to... hugely, drastically shorten my lifespan to be with you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like long distance is kind of shorthand for what they were dealing with, but also very different.
But I felt that,
Yeah.
And then, oh gosh, I'm gonna need help with his name. No, not Boromir. Is it Faramir?
Which one are we talking about? Boromir and Faramir are both characters.
Okay, so Faramir is like the less favorite child.
Yes, that's Faramir.
Okay, I changed my mind. He's the one I want to wrap up in a blanket
and
feed
yeah.
soup.
No, I feel like people don't talk about that as much on the internet, but his character arc and his like whole thing was like, he's the character I feel deserved what happened to him the least, even including Sam, because Sam signed up for that. You can't just not sign up for being someone's son.
Yeah, especially, you can't sign up for having a shitty ass dad. But yeah, I felt the worst for him, especially seeing him get really teared up. Like, I wanted to cry. I was like, you can't say this to your son, you bastard. I'll be a better father than you.
I didn't remember. It's to clarify, I've seen these a lot, but it's been a long time since I actually truly watched them through. And upon this most recent rewatch, I had forgotten that, oh gosh, Denethor. I remember his name, don't worry everybody. Denethor straight up said, yeah, I wish you had died and Boromir had lived. He didn't even say anything alluding to that. He straight up said that, and I have never wanted to punch a man more in the face than at that moment. And I don't even understand it. Boromir is the lesser favorite of the two, in my opinion, and even if he had more in common with Boromir than Faramir, I don't know. He just had like less character development, and I just can't see where he's coming from.
It was Boromir. I was like, oh, that's the meme guy.
He did the one does not simply walk into more. Oh,
that's such an old meme now. Oh my
the
gosh.
movies are 20 years old at this point.
No, I know. But yeah, I felt
The movies are 20 years old. Everybody, think about that.
Which give this video some more time. It'll be like, oh, actually, it's 40 years old.
Oh shit, we're outing ourselves. It is X years old, everybody. Haha, feel old yet?
Yeah. Anyways, so I felt bad for Faramir. Want to take care of him and make sure he feels appreciated.
Give him soup.
Soup.
Which
oh wait, tell us, what is your favorite soup? What's the most calming one? I mean, there's chicken noodle, but like it's pretty bland. It's what you eat when you're sick.
But chicken noodles got that like chicken like broth taste, which is really good.
Yeah, but I just associate it with upset tummy feelings.
I like Italian wedding soup. That shit's good.
What?
Italian wedding soup.
The fuck's that? I've never heard of this.
Leave a comment if you know what Italian wedding soup is. It's a kind of soup. I don't know. I don't know what's all in it. It's good though.
So you know what's
I think it's got lentils.
Oh, I think I maybe know what you're talking about. Anyways. So, recently we were having a conversation, and it occurred to both of us that I must not have been paying too close attention. Again, I blame it on, I was tipsy when we were watching it, but I was like, so they just needed to throw the ring in like fucking lava? Why didn't they just, you can...
And this was a cardinal sin, which I could not excuse. I had to explain to her the basic premise of the entire series. The fact that they couldn't have just thrown it into lava or fire, that they had to go to Mordor. She watched the entire series. She watched all 3 of the movies and didn't know why they had to actually go to Mordor. It was after we were finished watching them that I explained this to her.
So you think I was paying attention? What?
There was like 3 different instances of them explaining this very concept. He threw it in the fire in the first one. It didn't even get hot.
That's just fire, though. Like lava, I wouldn't fuck around with lava.
Aside from them explicitly saying several times, oh, it has to be destroyed in the fires in which it was made, it also was hit by an axe by Gimli in the first one, and it broke the axe, not the ring. The thing is indestructible.
I don't know why I don't remember that.
Aside from the fires of Mount Doom. Which, literally, most people who've seen the movie and aren't even, like, big fans of Lord of the Rings would probably know.
Oops. At least I don't say, or at least I don't, like, confuse, like, Link and Zelda. Like, that's
but that's the same. No, that's the same level, though.
Is it?
It is. It's the basic premise of the whole story.
Oops, you married an idiot.
Anyway, any other takeaways?
So, like, there were many Groots. I do remember there were Groots.
I was like, Groot. Ents. Okay.
Yeah. When I first watched it, I literally thought they were saying ants the whole time. I was like, why are they called ants?
Those are trees.
There's probably ants on them.
The ants are controlling the bodies of the trees like a giant mechanical suit thing, like a anime mech.
It'd be terrifying if you were an ant. It's like parasitic or something.
No, what I'm saying is the trees aren't alive. It's actually just all the ants.
Oh, I see.
And they're controlling it like a puppet.
Gotcha. So I'm probably one of the only people that dislikes Pippin. Or at least I feel like it's an unpopular opinion to dislike him.
I don't think it's necessarily that debated. I just think that personally, I like Pippin. I think that he's got a pretty strong character arc throughout, where he goes from being, you know, borderline,
Doofus.
you know, incompetent at everything to like the waiting on the steward of Gondor, and then in the end he was forced to be part of a battle, even ended up killing a single orc, which is the height of what he was able to do. But he had this slow maturing over time where he began to realize that like this isn't a fun silly adventure, this is war. And
these are Nazis out here, Pippin.
yeah, exactly. and he definitely like had a lot of time to like self-reflect, and even he, the lightest and funniest of them all, was affected by war in the end. It doesn't not affect anybody, which is kind of an interesting point considering in the movies the Shire was kind of fine throughout everything. They made a point saying that if Sauron won, then the Shire would be affected. But in the books, the Shire actually was briefly taken over by Saruman, which didn't happen in the movies.
Oh, really?
Which I think is better thematically, because it does kind of show more all-encompassing the fact that war doesn't leave anything alone. You're not just going to be able to escape it by going somewhere else. You know, it changed everything, and it changed everyone involved in the stories. Which actually leads me on to another point, which I thought was very interesting. Something I hadn't quite noticed when I was watching for the first time, which is just that when the hobbits return to the Shire, you know, they've changed. And I recognize that, like, there was the whole plot point where Frodo had changed too much to stay in the Shire. I got that one, but I didn't realize that everyone else hadn't really changed, and they just looked at the hobbits who had just saved all of Middle-earth as, you know, those guys that live down the street. They still just saw them as guys, even though they were bowed down to by, you know, a whole crowd of people in Minas Tirith and were regarded as close friends of the king and stuff like that. Which I think is interesting, because it's true. You can't really be a big deal in your hometown, because they're just going to know, like, oh, I used to change your diaper. I saw you try to steal a Coke from the gas station when you were 5.
I saw that moron fall off his fucking roof as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is an interesting contrast. There's like that one shot at the end where they're passing by. I actually don't know which hobbit this is supposed to be, so forgive me.
Fake fan.
But you know, they're passing by that one older hobbit on the way back, and they're on their horses, and they got all their gear on, and they look like high society, and he just kind of looks at them the same way he always has, with that sort of like evil eye, like, what are you doing on my lawn?
What are you doing in my swamp?
So I thought that was interesting and true to life.
I find it interesting you said that in the books that the Shire was taken over, but they didn't go for that approach in the movies, which I feel like could almost communicate another message. Like, you know, you hear of, like, you know, terrible things happening, like, in other countries, but if you're far enough away from the problem, you can maybe feel like...
You can just kind of think that it's not even happening.
Yeah. Which, like, is a problem in itself, and kind of an interesting one that you could raise there.
Yeah, that's kind of like a problem we have in America, where we're like, why should we care about this? It's happening halfway across the globe.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's their problem. Anyways.
As if the world isn't interconnected and things are always going to affect each other in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. But yeah, I do feel like, and maybe I appreciate watching these now that, like, I'm older. Like, that could also just be a factor.
It is a pretty mature story. Like not in the way that's like they're all cursing and stuff, but just like... the way it's told is very mature.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think, how old would I have been? How long ago was that? Let me think for a second.
It was high school.
Yeah, well, I was probably like, either a sophomore. I think I was a junior actually. Okay, so it was probably about 8 years ago, which I mean, it's like not like that much of a difference, but I guess enough where, I'm old enough now that I was able to just appreciate it better, or certain, characters were just more admirable for me to, like, watch.
Well, I'd argue that you do a lot of the maturing you do in life between the ages of, like, I don't know, let's just say 15 to 25, 30 maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, at that point, when I was in high school, like, the only thing I was interested in was Phantom of the Opera, which will probably lead to one of our other next videos where we are reviewing a story, because one of the things we did was go to New York and we saw Phantom of the Opera, but I will save that for a different video.
I don't want to spoil anything, but it was a very different experience than watching the movie.
Yeah.
For sure. Any final thoughts you have about the story? Any honorable mentions about things that you just thought were interesting, amusing, whatnot?
I thought it was sweet that Sam, like, went back and married. Was her name Rosie?
Yeah, Rosie Cotton.
Rosie Cotton. Wow, what a name. But I thought that was sweet. He knew what he wanted. He went back and he got it. It would have been her. Aww. Yeah, there were scenes that, like, I felt a little emotional watching, because,
Oh man, I cried real bad when Frodo left on the boats when I was younger. It was like a melancholy that I hadn't even understood in my own life until I was, like, watching it, and I didn't understand. It's like, why is this making me feel so emotional? It's not like he even died. Well, I mean, first of all, it's kind of meant to be a metaphor for death, but I didn't, like, understand at the time when I was younger, and so it just made me feel some kind of way,
This whole time I was confused, and I thought you were talking about when he, like, climbed into, like, the little rowboat, and, like, Sam, like, caught up with him and almost drowned. And I was like, what? I was like, oh, you mean at the end.
Fan theory, when Frodo and Sam leave the Fellowship of the Ring at the end of the first movie, they actually die.
The end.
They both drowned, and the rest of the movie, it was all in their heads. I don't know how to do fan theories.
The Eagles took the ring and dropped it off at. They
were all characters in Gollum's imagination as he sat staring at the ring for 500 years.
Wow. I did also, it just really drove me crazy to see when Gollum, like, tossed out, like, what was it? It's
the lembas bread.
Yeah. And then, like, watching, like, Sam trying to find it, he's like, I swear we had more. And I was just like, no, let's kill him.
That was always a complaint that my dad had about the movies, because it was somewhat contrived and fabricated drama, which didn't actually happen in the books. And he always had to point that out every time we watched it.
Yeah, but the thing, it makes sense, though. Gollum's a tweaker, He's gonna be an asshole.
My two boyfriends and their tweaker friend go on a hike.
Anyways. Do you have anything else that you would like to add? Any final thoughts?
I find the writing to be very tight, and I always appreciate that in a story, where everything just kind of comes together and works in some way or other. I feel like there was a lot of room in which a story like this could have felt like it lost focus over time, especially since there's, like, depending upon the point in the story we're talking about, 3 or 4 different plots going on. We got Frodo and Sam trying to get to Mordor, and they don't trust Gollum. And then somewhere else we've got Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas looking for Merry and Pippin. And then over there we have Merry and Pippin talking to some Ents. And then occasionally we're, like, cutting back to Arwen leaving Middle-earth and realizing that she wants to be with Aragorn.
Realizing she wants to die.
Yes. And no, and yeah, so there was just a lot happening, and I really don't blame you too much for not fully understanding it. It's kind of, it is actually kind of interesting because the political stuff in these movies, not talking about like what kind of message it's sending, but just like the politics of the nations and stuff that typically happens in high fantasy, weren't nearly as complicated as I remember them being as a kid, and they were actually quite digestible, especially considering, the Silmarillion exists, and Middle Earth probably has one of the most complex lores to it in comparison to other fantasy settings. So the fact that it is even like understandable to a sort of basic audience is kind of a miracle. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I didn't think about it when I was younger, but it's like there's just two kingdoms of men, Rohan and Gondor. And then there's like elves and there's dwarves, but it really doesn't get that complicated. It's just that the two don't like each other, and then eventually they work together.
Which, thank goodness that it was that simple, because, being someone that's not into high fantasy, if there's just too much shit to keep track of, I'm like, what, who are these people? What are you doing here? What do you want? And, politics, yay.
Yeah, so like I said, it did a really good job at staying focused on the overall plot as it went along. There was definitely some things that kind of don't focus as much, but still definitely serve a good purpose as time goes on. Like, the best I can think of is how Saruman took over Theoden's mind, and they had to sort of do like a side quest to save him and get Rohan back on track. But obviously that, served to get Rohan back on the side of good and having them work together with Gondor and all that stuff. But it definitely felt when it was starting like, oh, what are we doing over here now? This has nothing to do with the ring. So yeah, I just think it's very good at having this be a really big story with grand ambition and grand scale, and still be perfectly understandable on both a macro and micro scale, where it's like, I understand all the characters and their motivations, I understand what's happening in a wider sense between the countries, and and then, the ending, I understand that they all ended up banding together to stop Sauron. Mm-hmm. And it's just a very well written, well realized classic story of good versus evil that I highly recommend to anyone who wants like a good, solid fantasy story that has a lot of good messages to it. I don't know if anyone is going to listen to this who hasn't seen Lord of the Rings or anything like that. I can't imagine that there's too many people who are listening to this in the first place, but if they are like, I've never seen or heard about this. What are you talking about?
Living under a rock.
Yeah. And I understand that we're not exactly being hip with the times talking about this right now. If we wanted to do that, we could have talked about Barbie or Oppenheimer, but we're over here like, hey, y'all heard of Lord of the Rings?
Which we could do an episode on Barbie, because we did see that recently, which...
Oh, that was such a good movie.
Have not seen Oppenheimer,
which I also heard was a very good movie. But, until next time, which could be Barbie or Oppenheimer, I'm Michael.
And I'm Deanna.
And eat your vegetables.